Welcome back, everyone, to the Winning Play Podcast. Alongside my co-hosts Drew James and Robb Hue, I am Kendall Capps. Boys, another wild weekend in the NFL. There's a ton of thrillers, some crazy games, and a couple near upsets. Minnesota almost took a dump on the field and lost to the Jags somehow. But how about we kick things off with the Kansas City Chiefs skating by the hair on their chinny chin once again, of all things, a blocked field goal to win the game.
Yeah, the Chiefs get lucky again, or get good at the end again. It's hard to say which one, but when you're 9-0, I guess any complaints you have are pretty minor. Are they doing it too close? Are they relying on comeback at the end of the game? At this point, it doesn't really matter. I don't see them losing much after the way things have gone. I feel like it might even get easier.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of teams this week, some of the more producing teams like Minnesota and Detroit and the Chiefs, and even San Francisco, where they had a lot of miscues, some red zone issues, and all these teams came out with the W regardless. So that's, it is lucky. It's a little annoying to see Kansas City come out on top again the way they did, but if you're not reacting emotionally, I mean, this is what good teams do, is when they have off games, when Jared Goff throws 5 interceptions, which is just insane, the team comes out with a win. So that was a little bit of a under publicized theme this week with some of these teams.
Yeah, speaking of the Lions, they became the first team since 1970 to throw 5 picks, trail by double digits, and still win a football game. If that doesn't build an immense amount of confidence that even if we underperform and we don't play well, they find a way. That was really impressive because they did not look ready to play on Sunday night at all in Houston. Houston was ready to go. It was a big game for them as well. And to look the way they did and to bounce back in that second half and play as well as they did, especially defensively. I mean, I've been really impressed since they lost Aiden Hutchinson. That defense has actually still been pretty solid, especially up front, which we thought there would be a big drop-off, but there hasn't been that much this. Goes bananas. I mean, did you guys have as much fun as I did watching that game?
What a great, it was just fun game to watch with both of those teams. Lamar Jackson looks like he's pretty solidly heading for his 3rd MVP and back-to-back MVPs. And the Bengals look like they're finally getting things together, but especially with this loss, it might be too late. Or I wouldn't say too late yet, but they're going to have to really be almost perfect the rest of the way to go to end up in the playoffs here, even though that offense looks as good as any other one in the league. But coming down to tie the game and missing the 2-point conversion to win, it was pretty epically close. And the Ravens this year have been pulling games out in the fourth quarter, where years before that seemed like a weakness of theirs.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a couple of duds on Thursday Night Football, but it feels like this year, the Atlanta Bucks game and the Ravens Bengals game, it feels like there's been some really exciting back and forth games on Thursday night. So that's pretty fun to see. It is a little unfortunate. I don't want to harp on this too much. It's a little unfortunate that it came down to a couple kind of blatant missed calls by the refs at the very end again.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Three on one play, hands to the face on Joe Burrow. There was a defensive holding before the throw, and then you could argue that was pass interference on the tight end for the 2-point conversion. I mean, all on one play and no whistles. It's a little weird that even on 2-point conversions, they're almost refereeing it like it's a Hail Mary. And it's really odd. You can't really do that on these 2-yard plays. Like the Hail Mary, it's understandable because, I mean, you can't really reward just long chucking it, but on these like organized 2-yard plays, you'd like to see defenses not be able to just manhandle like it's NFL Blitz 99.
Well, I feel like it reminded me, because we see this quite often when there's a game coming down to the very end, the refs tend to swallow their whistle. And maybe they're subconsciously thinking, I don't want to be the reason one team wins or loses. And it reminds me of that 49ers-Ravens Super Bowl about 10 years ago when the Niners were driving down the field at the end of that game, and they have 2nd and goal, 3rd and goal, 4th and goal from the 3-yard line. And guys are getting mugged. Receivers are getting mugged all around, all over the field, and there's no calls made. And it almost feels like the end of an NBA type game where the refs just want to recuse themselves. And so knowing that that tends to happen, if I'm a defensive coordinator and a game is coming down to the final play, a 2-point conversion, I'm telling my DBs, get a hold of these guys. Do whatever you got to do.
Yeah.
I mean, worst case scenario, they throw the flag, they move it to the 1.
Yeah, but you just want it to be called. It's like baseball, right? Like you want that strike zone to be consistent all game. Once it's established in the first inning, you want to see the consistency there. So if you're calling pass interferences and holdings throughout the game, like I don't want to see you egregiously swallow your whistle. I mean, look, it always comes down to this, and everyone wants to nitpick the reffing at the end. I understand that. That's why I didn't want to harp on it too bad. But 3 in one play, and you don't call one of them. I mean, it's just it's a little bit too much. But at the end of the day, exciting game, and I thought the Bengals were going to pull it out. They were the more desperate team, but Lamar and the Ravens, when they can play their style of game, they're going to be tough to watch or tough to beat.
Well, and it's crazy because that game completely changed on Chase Brown's fumble. Baltimore could not do anything on offense for 2.5 quarters, and Cincinnati was marching up and down the field. If he doesn't fumble, maybe they go in the end zone and they go up 28-10, and that might have been too much to come back from. Instead, he fumbles, they get a short field, they score, they got some momentum going. Suddenly the running game gets going a little bit. Like, it was wild. But to Cincy's credit, Jamar Chase, just throw it to that guy because, he's just going to do what he does. Most yards, I believe, in a single season against one opponent in NFL history, 206 or 465 yards. Secondary, by the way.
He has 3 of the top 8 fantasy performances of all time for wide receivers.
Wild.
So, I mean, he's the
wild.
ultimate boom or bust. I mean, I will say, like, Cincinnati fans.
Except without the bust. Yeah.
I mean, he does.
He's okay.
He does have some bust for a wide receiver one, but yeah, you'll take the weak.
Does.
You'll take the weak winners. I will say, Cincinnati fans, as a Bucs fan, I'm jealous. You guys got to go out on your shield rather than your sideline. Your coach went for it on at the end of the game because you knew defenses weren't stopping each other. So I think the lack of blame on the coach's decision there says it all for that decision. Everybody kind of knew that defenses weren't going to stop each other. So yeah, it was a fantastic game.
Even though they didn't get the 2, I think everybody agrees that was probably the right call to go.
Yeah, I was a little jealous because I'd like to, I wish I knew what that felt like. But
all right,
anyway.
guys, I want to transition to another great football game over the weekend, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on whether this team should maybe start being taken a little bit more serious, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They go on the road into Washington. Jaden Daniels looks healthy again, and they pull out a stunner, 28-27, and part of the reason why I took Pittsburgh just before kick was ultimately I trusted that defense to make a stop if they had to, and I didn't trust Washington's, and it ultimately came down to that. Their defense made the stop because Washington had ball late with a chance to go kick a field goal and were unable to do so. Pittsburgh's now 3-0 under Russell Wilson, and I have to give Mike Tomlin a lot of credit because when you bench a quarterback who's 4-2 and not playing terribly, he's not playing great, maybe he's missing some throws, but the team's winning some games, they're in first place, and you bench him, and Russ comes in and their whole offense, he has opened up their offense, and the passing yards per game, his deep shots look legit again. Mike Williams, I mean, he turned his one target into a long score. I know their schedule is really, really difficult rest of way, but is it about time that we start taking the Steelers serious contenders in the AFC?
Well,
Yeah,
I think they
absolutely.
have to. They're 7-2. They're up there in the standings. But like you said, they still haven't played the Ravens, so they've got 2 games left against the Ravens. They haven't played the Bengals. They've got 2 games left against the Bengals, and I think they still play the Eagles and the Chiefs as well.
And
So
two
we'll
games against the
see.
Browns. They have all 6 divisional games left.
Yeah, the Browns obviously not as scary as the other ones,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we'll see exactly how serious you got to take them. But at this point, I mean, it's going to be really hard for the Steelers to miss the playoffs. And like you
Well, and
said
they
with
have the
Tomlin, you've got to feel like you're in every game. Uh,
yeah, and they have the best. They have the best defense of all, I believe, of all the remaining teams that they play. And I'm always a big proponent of defense first, as long as you could put up some of those points. And if Coach of the Year came down to the biggest cojones decision, the most impactful single decision that a coach has made, it would have to be Tomlin. Because we talk about, I
Yeah.
brought up Harbaugh last week. You talk about these top coaches, they show their worth in making these decisions before the bottom falls out, like a lot of other coaches do, where Harbaugh kind of has allowed Herbert. Now, they threw a little bit less last week, but has allowed Herbert to sling it around more, and you see a change in the philosophy a little bit with that team. And then you saw Tomlin make this QB change, and, a lot of people were scratching their head and wondering if it was the right move. I mean, he looks pretty Nostradamus-like at this point.
Well, and even some of
And
the
a really
Steelers
confident
players.
decision. Oh yeah, and and then also going to go grab Mike Williams. I mean, I know I had questions about the scheme fit because it was kind of like George Pickens and him. But look, if they're just gonna put them on opposite sides of the field and force you to double one or roll coverage to one and then just have another one, I mean, both those receivers are going to be better 50-50 specialists than the cornerbacks covering them. So, I mean, if that's really what they're going to do with Russ and just do these 30-yard bombs, I mean,
which is kind of Russ's thing.
it's a little hard to see that consistently work if someone wants to play too deep like Buffalo likes to and stuff like that. But, look, it's been working and it's hard to argue otherwise.
But some of the things that they did in this game, they won't be able to continue winning. If you think they had 3 bad turnovers, a fake punt, had an interception in the third quarter, and fumbled at the 1 yard line in the fourth, it's tough to have those kind of plays and keep winning. So I feel like there's a little bit of luck here in being able to come back from 10 down in this one. But yeah, I'm not sure how much they can keep it up down the stretch, but I think they're definitely a playoff team. I also don't think they're winning that division over the Ravens.
I don't know, with that Ravens secondary, they very well might. All right, so from looking at a team moving in the right direction, now let's look at a couple of teams that are moving in the wrong direction. The Dallas Cowboys, the New York Jets, both of them absolute failures, miserable failures this season. So, Rob, I'm curious, who do you think is having more of a miserable season this year?
I mean, they're both pretty miserable. I would say I would say internally it probably feels about the same, but externally, I would say the Jets are more of a disaster because I mean the Cowboys, their whole thing is that they think they're going to the Super Bowl every year and all that stuff like that. I don't think they had the team once Jerry didn't make the moves for running back and stuff. I don't think they really had the team, but the Jets, this was kind of like the revamp from or the redo from last year where they're supposed to have had this top tier defense. Then they have Aaron Rodgers. Then they have Garrett Wilson, the young promising guy. Then Breece Hall, the RB stud. And then on top of that, then they go get Aaron Rodgers' old guy, Devontae Adams. And it's this whole load up and this, reboot from all the hype from last year. That's a little bit less so than last year, but just, these guys have been waiting. And so it's got to be an absolute disaster because, Aaron Rodgers just looks washed, for a legend washed. I mean, he's still not like a bottom 10 QB, I'd say. But at the same time, then Breece Hall, whatever is between it, whether it's usage or whether it's just the whole overall dysfunction for the offense. I mean, these offensive studs and impressive playmakers just aren't showing up. I mean, the Cowboys, in my opinion, externally weren't going to make a ton of moves. I had the Eagles winning the division, and then just 3 games in, Jaden Daniels, I would have said he was better already than that Cowboys team anyway. So, I just have to say from where they could be to where they are, I'd say the Jets are more of a disaster.
Yeah, it's hard to pick here. partially because I didn't think either of these teams were going to be good at the beginning of the year. So I wouldn't even say they're moving in the wrong direction as much as they're just sitting at the bottom. Yeah, the Jets experiment looks completely failed. I think they had maybe 200 yards of offense total against the Cardinals defense that has not looked like world beaters thus far this season. You have to think that can't be salvaged. I guess I would say it's a bigger disaster for the Cowboys only because for the Packers, you were looking at or the Jets, you were looking at this like a this year project. Like we've got to do it this year. The Cowboys looks like this whole plan that they've set up for the next few years and just spent a lot of money on may be the wrong plan. You're already talking about the coach being fired. I mean, I guess the Jets already fired the coach. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. They're kind of mirror images on either side of the league here. But the Cowboys look like they might be in trouble for years to come. The Jets have spent the last 2 decades being in trouble, so I don't see that turning around anytime soon.
Well, and what's really funny, reports came out this morning that the Jets are going to stand by Aaron Rodgers and potentially look to bring him back beyond this season. And if you look at the way that team is constructed, and they still have some offensive line issues, he looks like a 41-year-old statue, right? Like he used to be able to move. That was part of what made Aaron Rodgers was he could make guys miss. He wasn't Tom Brady who just manipulated the pocket a little bit. He extended plays. He got to the outside. He'd pick up 20, 30 yards rushing in a game and also be able to make plays on the move. He's a statue now who's also becoming far less accurate than we've seen in years past. And it's been 3 or 4 years since we saw him play at an elite level now. It's not like it was just a year or two ago. So it's very on brand for the Jets to stand by him and to potentially bring him back again. Because if that happens, I think we're looking at an even worse season next year.
I can't see him wanting to play again next year. Like he looks like a 41-year-old that ripped his Achilles. He looks like it's time to be commentating on football and not playing football. I mean, when would you think Aaron Rodgers would have Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams and throw for 150 yards and no touchdowns? Like, it's not working.
An average secondary.
Yeah, like this is not working.
I will say
they look
Arizona
like they've
hasn't
given up
allowed
as
like
well.
a passing touchdown. Arizona hasn't allowed a passing touchdown at home in like a month. So it is an interesting
but the point is still there, right?
I'm just saying
it's more than 6 points,
Yeah.
Another really struggling offense in Chicago, Caleb Williams, man, has he regressed. You know, his first 3 games, he looked like a rookie quarterback, understandably so. Then he seemed to be like turning a corner. He was getting better. He had 3 consecutive really solid starts. Now the Bears have lost 3 in a row, and it's almost like that Hail Mary against Washington that they lost. The team has not looked the same ever since, and he has looked really, really bad. There's some calls for him to be benched, which is obviously a little ridiculous at this point. But I'm curious, with them now firing their offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, do you guys think that Chicago's offense can turn it around?
Well, they have they have a tough schedule. So, I mean, you know, Minnesota can get thrown on, but overall, I mean, Green Bay gets a lot of sacks and their offensive line was a problem. Shane Waldron was absolutely a problem for this team, though. I mean, we're talking about an outdated power run scheme on a team that roster construction wise was never built for a power run scheme, period. Anyway, it was always a scheme misfit, and he just never really. Caleb is showing some of the same problems he showed his senior year of college, but it's a little bit of the Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen thing. It's like I'd like to see an offensive coordinator be flexible and be innovative and utilize his QB strengths. It's already halfway through the season, so you have plenty of data on what he's comfortable with in practices and rollouts and allow him to find comfort in rhythm. And while I see a little bit of like the post-firing like resurgence you see in a lot of coaches, I just, I don't know what this team can do with a strong schedule rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I sat here 3 weeks ago when they were 4-2 and said, I don't buy it. This team is not very good. Now they've dropped 3 straight.
All over it.
They've dropped 3 straight, but not just that. I don't see another win for them this year. If you look at their schedule, like Who we got? They got the Packers, Vikings, Lions, Niners, Vikings,
It's a brutal
Seahawks,
schedule.
Lions,
It's a brutal
Packers.
schedule.
I don't see them winning any of those games. So maybe they can draft some more help for Caleb Williams, but I think when the calls are coming from inside the house for the benching, is what we're hearing is that the players are wanting him benched. Is there an attitude fit? Is there an attitude problem? Clearly, the
Well,
coaching
he's
is
one of
not
the
working.
most inaccurate quarterbacks since they started doing like advanced inaccuracy metrics in like early in the mid 2000 aughts. So I mean,
Yeah, so
it's
throws of 15 yards or more, he's dead last of the quarterbacks in the last 30 years on accuracy.
it's terrible. Yeah, it's not looking good for him. But I mean, look, I mean, it's a little bit like the Anthony Richardson thing. What are you guys competing for in Chicago? Like, you can't bench him. Like, just play with him. Let him. I know DJ Moore. I mean, look, DJ Moore's walking it off to the sideline in the middle of plays, and he's giving like gloomy press conferences and all this stuff. I mean, on one side, you could say he's been really unlucky with quarterbacks. On the other side, I'm like, I mean, I guess it's hard to blame him when you do look at the inaccuracy stats, but it's a little bit like you also don't need to be bringing it to the press conferences. But
Yeah, but to Drew's point, the calls for a potential benching were coming from in-house, reportedly from some of the players, which makes you wonder, what is it about Caleb Williams? Because most players would recognize this is a rookie quarterback. Like, you're not going to call to sit him unless there's something off the field. And if you remember his time at SC, he's known for being flamboyant and a little awkward in very different in a lot of ways, personality-wise. And I wonder if it just hasn't jived with a lot of his teammates. And so one has to wonder, I mean, considering where we were just a month ago when he was coming off a couple really solid games to where we are now, and you look at the rest of these rookie quarterbacks that are outplaying him now. I mean, Mac Jones didn't have a great day by any means in Chicago, but he at least led the team to 19 points. I mean, to lose to New England by
Drake
16.
May, but...
Oh, Drake May. Yes, I'm sorry. Drake May. It's kind of amazing that, he was the surefire number one pick. Everyone knew that he was going number one. And then all these guys go after him, and they are all playing much, much better football than he is.
Yeah, you got to think they might be wanting Jaden Daniels, right?
Well, teams should just throw the house at the number 2 pick and not the number 1 pick. You know what I mean? It's happened with C.J. Stroud now over Bryce Young. It's happened with literally every quarterback in this class except for Penix because we can't see him. But every quarterback, Nix and Jaden and Drake, they all look really good. They all look really good. And, different supporting casts and stuff like that. But Caleb had the best supporting cast of all of them. And it's, I will say he probably had the worst OC of all of them too. But I digress.
And speaking of young quarterbacks, and you touched on him really briefly, Anthony Richardson with the Colts, he's got his job back. It was reported this morning that Shane Steichen is actually going to insert him back into the starting lineup, and it will be for the rest of the season. It's obviously like a no-brainer call, but the fact that he had to watch another dumpster fire football game from Joe Flacco after having one of the most pathetic performances the week prior from Joe Flacco, it was almost like he didn't want to put Richardson back in after the first dumpster fire because he realized that would be admitting I'm an idiot, I was wrong. But then when Flacco is atrocious again, everyone on the whole planet's like, what are you doing? And so then he realized, all right, I guess I'll swallow it and I'll put him back in now. But this just does not seem like things are going to go smoothly for anybody in Indy.
I said 3 weeks ago, if you're watching these guys play, you should not be benching Anthony Richardson. A lot of these problems are his receivers not being open and not catching balls. And however rusty he's looked, the team looks better with him at quarterback. Now, like you said, he could have put him back in after last week. Maybe the 1 week benching, you could say, for taking the play off or some kind of. Once you let it sit for 2 weeks, you really kind of double down. And we're like, no, Joe Flacco's our starter. We're sticking with him. And then to go right and now say, Anthony's the starter for the rest of the season, it just looks like nobody knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm going to pay attention to these Colts games moving forward because I've mentioned it multiple times about not being impressed with what Shane Steichen is doing for game
Mm-mm.
plans and types of play calls. And this is, again, just like the Shane Waldron thing where it's like with Caleb Williams, I don't see them making it easier on these quarterbacks. Where are the design rollouts, the one read and goes? Simplify this game. And the fact that Joe Flacco, who looked great last year down the stretch, looked absolutely horrible. And in that game where Minnesota was getting to the quarterback so much, I didn't see him giving a lot of quick throws or running back screens to Jonathan Taylor, who has shown that he could take a screen to the house. I just don't see a lot of these things that feel like common sense for offensive coordinators, and he hasn't been impressive in prior years. So I'm not really sure what's going on with him, but I'm going to pay a close attention to him because I think he's also a big part of the problem.
Yeah, I think Tom Brady has set up an unrealistic expectation here that quarterbacks can last until they're 40 years old and still be playing at the same level, and that just doesn't happen. And so you see these guys like Flacco and Aaron Rodgers, and it's like, what happens? Like, well, they're old. And, I mean, there's a reason no other team wanted Flacco on their team last year. He's a backup quarterback at best at this point. And the reason you bring him in is because you're trying to have him teach the youngster. So I feel like at the end of the day, it just looks like bad choices all around. You think the coach has to go.
Well, and that's almost a perfect segue to detail some of the fantasy fallout and looking ahead to the rest of the season, because one guy who very well might be directly impacted by this quarterback switch in Indianapolis is Josh Downs, because he's the one guy that actually got a little bit of a boost because he was getting force-fed targets, and even though they weren't accurate targets, he was still reeling in 5-6 balls from Joe Flacco every week, and he didn't have that same rapport with Anthony Richardson. So one has to wonder, rest of season, does he get knocked down a little bit, or does Richardson actually, step up his game and help the entire offense? That remains to be seen. But overall, let's take a look at rest of season projections within the fantasy landscape. I want to start with the quarterback position. And if you go and look at quarterbacks drafted in fantasy leagues this year, the top 12 drafted, and you look at who are currently the top 12, 6 of the top 12 were not drafted in the top 12. And beyond that, from this point forward, there's a few guys that were drafted even beyond that might be really highly ranked, one of which we talked about him last week a little bit is Justin Herbert. He's had 3 really, really strong games, top 10 finishes in a row. And when you look at his upcoming schedule, he's got games against Cincy and their sad-ass secondary, the Ravens, who have the worst secondary in the NFL, who just lost their best player in their secondary, Atlanta, who's been pretty much a dumpster fire to throw against, in Tampa Bay. So it's 1st, 2nd, 5th, and 7th most passing yards allowed over the course of the next 5 weeks. So I personally have him at least top 8 rest of season at the quarterback position, and he is readily available. So if you've been relying on a Kirk Cousins or Jared Goff, who's been inconsistent because they run the ball so often, or you've been dealing, even Kyler, he had a couple monster games, but with some of the games down the stretch, he's got really tough matchups. You have to wonder, is a guy like Justin Herbert someone that should be scooped up and owned in nearly every league going forward?
Absolutely. I just scooped him up in our league of record. I would say with his rushing floor he's been showing recently, plus, you touched on the defenses, but coupled with that, every team you just named, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Atlanta, and Tampa Bay, I'm not quite sure where Atlanta ranks, but the rest of those are top 4 offenses in the NFL. So, they're going to be forced to pass the ball along with a low-end passing defense. So that coupled in fantasy is just absolute gold, because what you're saying are shootouts. So,
look at his stats. He's only thrown 1 interception this year. He has as many rushing touchdowns as he does interceptions, which is pretty soft for any quarterback. And yeah, I agree. I think if he's on the waivers, he should be on the score. And depending on who.
Well, and I'm going to go ahead and call it right now. the Chiefs, their first loss of the season will be against the Los Angeles Chargers
When do they play?
Interesting.
in a few weeks coming up in Kansas City, I believe.
I'd have to look at their schedule. I don't have their schedule right up.
Yeah, it's in
He's
Kansas
never
City,
led me
December
astray.
8th.
I mean,
Yeah.
I like it. The odds of them going actually undefeated, especially with how close every game has been. I mean,
Yep. Well,
it's
and I
pretty
remember
low.
as a Pats fan, when we went 17-0, the first 13 weeks, we were murdering fools. I mean,
Yeah.
murking teams left and right.
Very
37
different team.
We beat Tennessee 52-7. Like it was wild. And then the last 4 weeks, we barely escaped the game against the Eagles. The Ravens game came down to the wire. Like it was the Giants
The
game
Giants
in the
game,
final week
yeah.
of the regular season. We were trailing and we hit that deep shot to Moss to win the game late. Like things started getting tight, and things have been tight for the Chiefs all year, essentially. So I agree. Like it's really, really difficult to continue winning. Things aren't going to always go your way. And that's one particular matchup. The Chargers tend to play them really tough. That's actually the only non-optimal matchup fantasy-wise for Justin Herbert rest of the season is when he does play the Chiefs in Arrowhead. But you figure they're going to have to throw the ball. They haven't been running it nearly as much. So yeah, I that's one guy that I think rest of season is certainly worth well investing if you have anyone that's outside the top 6 or 7 at quarterback.
Totally.
Are there any other quarterbacks that you guys think rest of season are getting undervalued that should probably be rostered across the board?
I mean, if you aren't starting him yet, you should be playing Bo Nix. I know he's a
Totally.
rookie. I know that team is not, taking your breath away at 5-5, but he is a top 8 quarterback so far, and he's looking better and better. You have to feel like the upside there is top 5, but he's at least a top 10 quarterback that should be started.
Yeah, and his marriage with Sean Payton is a good one for fantasy because Sean Payton stays aggressive with the skill sets of his players. So Bo Nix can do something with his legs, and in the red zone, Sean Payton has had him do some RPOs and runs in there, as well as trick plays with Sutton throwing to Bo Nix and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's a little bit of the aggressiveness of Sean Payton as well to use it, and he's looked good. I mean, he's given Sutton probably his best stat lines of his career consistently over the last month, and overall that team has a bright future. Another guy that I'm high on though, and we touched on him earlier, is Russell Wilson. I think that he's had 2 out of 3 weeks he's been a QB1. And this is just him getting his feet wet. Now that he has another weapon in Mike Williams, he'll get worked in over the next couple weeks. I just think that I've been really impressed with what this team has done. And even when he doesn't have a high yardage total, he'll put up 2 to 3 touchdowns. So I'm looking to him to also enter QB1 territory rest of the season. Not a top 5 guy necessarily, but a guy that you can count on week in and week out for the rest of the season.
All right, there's another major talking point I feel like that a lot of fantasy managers are interested in, and that's the future of CeeDee Lamb. He has been, even though he was having a down year, that down year still had him as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver this year.
I think he's still wide receiver 5 right now.
Yeah, so he overall, over the course of the season, he's still been putting up solid production, just not that elite, number 2, number 3 overall draft pick that he was drafted at. And now we got a taste of what he looked like 1 week in with Cooper Rush and Trey Lance, which is even more scary. And as someone that the week before Dak was ruled out for the season, before Dak got hurt, I made the mistake of trading for CeeDee Lamb. And now, obviously, I couldn't have predicted Dak Prescott going down with the season-ending hamstring injury. But I personally am very, very concerned. And I looked at weekly rankings across the board at ESPN and CBS and all these different places, and they still have Lamb this week listed as wide receiver 11, wide receiver 13. And I feel like so often players with big names just get the benefit of the doubt in all these professional rankings across all these big websites. I'm sorry. CeeDee Lamb is not wide receiver 11. He's not wide receiver 13. I don't even think he's wide receiver 20, not just this week, rest of season. Because one, Cooper Rush is trash, and we all know he's trash. And if he's not even going to, we don't even know if he's going to be their starter. It might be Trey Lance, who can't hit the broadside of a barn. The 40 yards passing that Cooper Rush had last week for 3 quarters was still better than what we're going to get from Trey Lance. So even if he gets 10 targets a game, 12 targets a game, I think we're looking at a low-end wide receiver 2 at absolute best for CeeDee Lamb rest of the season. Drew, do you like it?
Yeah, I'm with you. There's a lot of guys I'd rather have over. I'd rather be starting Calvin Ridley over CeeDee Lamb at this point, or Brian Thomas Jr. for sure if Trevor Lawrence is healthy.
Which he's not. Jennings, he got ruled out this morning.
Yeah, so after Trevor Lawrence comes back, I'd make that statement. But there's just a lot of guys out there with, like, CeeDee's ceiling with Cooper Rush or Trey Lance is not very high. And the floor is abysmally low at this point.
Yes. Like, there's going to be 6-point duds.
100%. And that's the problem is the floor. I'm definitely concerned as a CeeDee Lamb owner. I mean, you can't not be it. When a quarterback only puts up 61 yards, I will say what's interesting of that is that CeeDee had like nearly half of those yards, which isn't saying much, but he's one blinded by the sun, easy pitch and catch touchdown, which was like right there from having over 15 points in that game in fantasy. And the narrative wouldn't be nearly as dire if he had just caught that. I mean, he didn't even see the ball, but he was wide open, and it was right there.
He was, but even if he did see it, the ball was so far behind him, he would have had to stop his momentum and kind of like reach back. Like, it wasn't going to be a gimme catch even if he saw the ball. Like, it was a terrible throw.
But I'd agree with Rob that he is going to get some touchdowns. He's not going to score 0 every week or just 21 yards on 6 catches.
It's the floor that's the problem, though. I mean, if your QB is capable of only throwing for 50 yards, or if they put Trey Lance in and he's not comfortable throwing and he'll run for 100 yards in a game but not throw for any. I mean, you can't not be concerned. To say you're not concerned is outright lying. I am still holding out. I'm a little bit less on the like he's donezo type of
I'm
train.
not saying he's donezo. I said he's a low-end wide receiver 2 rest of season best case scenario.
Yeah, 100%. And I might go further with more information as we get a couple weeks in. I'm still a little bit more open to seeing some hyper targeting just because I know Cooper Rush looked horrible, but we do have some data with him and Cooper. So I'm a data guy. So, I want to see a little bit more before I fully close the door on it.
Well, and one thing that also scares me with the situation is, does CeeDee Lamb not strike you guys as the kind of guy that if things aren't going well a week or 2 from now, he gets, he tweaks his knee, he hurts his ankle, and he's like, I'm going to take a few plays off, and then maybe I'll sit on next week. I'm still not feeling quite right. Like, I absolutely could foresee that being in the future as well. That's why guys, Jauan Jennings, for example, he's ranked consistently between 25th and 30th this week across the board in most sites. I'm starting Jauan Jennings over CeeDee Lamb this week.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
I know with those names, that sounds like a bold call, but I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, you
look at the rankings across all these sites, and it's like, CeeDee Lamb's number 11. It's like, what world are we living in that he's the 11th ranked wide receiver in fantasy right now for any week? Like, it's blasphemy.
Yeah, I mean, Jauan Jennings is I know you've been excited about it. If I had him, I'd be equally as excited. I mean, literally the only downside when you talk about Jauan is just the amount of weapons on that team, So, I mean, when he's filling Ayuk's position, so, I mean, it's just every now and then there's just going to be a dud game because somebody else is going to get the
3 for 55.
Points.
Like, on those, he'll have 3 for 55, or he'll have 6 for 90 and a score, or something like that.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's the only downside. But I mean, you got to be happy because you got Jauan Jennings for free off the waiver wire. So I mean, like it's very exciting to get a guy like that in a role like that. And it's so interesting because he's had these blow up games over the past couple of years, and whenever you watch him play, you're kind of like, it's just crazy that he's had to wait for an opportunity this long. And there's a potential here where I mean, he could just have a permanent role in this team moving forward, even beyond this season. So.
Well, I'm curious. So another another topic in fantasy that I think a lot of people are curious about. We've watched the Ravens wide receivers the last couple of weeks, especially Flowers. I mean, when he gets the ball in the open field, he's so quick, he's elusive. He seems like he has the potential to be a game-breaking wide receiver, and yet he lays these eggs occasionally, and I don't even know if you can put it on him. I mean, they score 35 and have 400 yards of offense on Thursday night, and he's basically not a part of that. So rest of season, Drew, do you have, expectations for him, for Deontay, who they brought in? Where do you see some of these guys falling out rest of season in Baltimore?
I mean, I think like Zay Flowers is a good play almost every week, but I think the hard part with the Ravens is who's it going to be this week? Is it going to be Derrick Henry's 4 touchdown game? Is it going to be Lamar takes one in for a score? Is Mark Andrews going to score the touchdowns? Is Isaiah likely going to come back and steal some? And if it's not of those, then which wide receiver is going to be catching them? So I'd say it's hard for me to trust any one of them and say, oh, they're rest of season great. I do think Zay Flowers is the one you want if you want. What are your thoughts there, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, so Zay Flowers was the one consistent factor. I mean, Lamar has really stepped it up passing wise, but overall, he's always been a guy that kind of spread the football around in targets. I've been a big fan of Zay's talent, but I think that the Ravens receivers are going to disappoint a little bit the rest of the season. I think Zay's going to become a little more inconsistent because as Deontay Johnson works in, Zay's biggest skill set is his yards after catch. So these little shorter area targets where they give him the ball right away and then he can make moves. Deontay is also the short and intermediate guy, so he's going to siphon some of those. And I think Rashad Bateman has done enough this year that Deontay's not going to just supplant him in the role that he has. And also they play a little bit different roles in that offense anyway. So I see when there's 3 of them plus Mark Andrews, plus what they really want to do is get a lead and then run the ball down your throat with Derrick Henry. Plus they got Keaton Mitchell coming back. I think the Ravens, it's going to be a little bit of a dilution factor where these receivers, and including Zay, who was the consistent guy in this offense, are going to take hits. So I think they're going to disappoint a little bit the rest of the season from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I think you touched on everything. There's so many miles to feed, and even though that is a high-octane offense, knowing there's also that added risk of Lamar just saying, nah, I'm just going to take it myself. Like, he's going to have a few more rushing scores probably the rest of this year. So that's just taking away from other opportunities. All right, guys, I know a lot of fantasy managers have been holding out hope that the savior, Christian McCaffrey's return, would be the savior of their fantasy teams. They probably were a little bit disappointed knowing he got, his normal or close to his normal workload in terms of snap share percentage this past week, and the overall production wasn't there. But I'm here to tell you, I think the underlying metrics to it, and if you look beyond that, you look beyond the fact that he only had 39 yards rushing on 13 carries against what has been, a stout rush defense in Tampa for many, many years, even though if they're not quite as good this year. The fact that he caught 6 balls for another 60 or so yards and is very active in their offense, if their kicker makes those 3 missed kicks, they score 30 plus. And people aren't really talking about, the Niners, their offense isn't quite in sync even with McCaffrey. No, they scored 34 points then. I think that's oversimplified. And as expected, he changes their offense, and we watched it play out. And their upcoming schedule, the next couple weeks, they got Seattle, Green Bay, and Buffalo, 3 of the worst rush defenses in the NFL. So I think we're about to see the McCaffrey that we thought we were going to see at the beginning of the season. In knowing guys like Saquon and Derrick Henry, who have been the top 2 running backs in fantasy throughout the entire season, have relatively difficult schedules, especially for Derrick Henry, rest of way, I actually predict that Christian McCaffrey rest of season finishes with the most fantasy points among all running backs.
That's a bold take. I'm not putting him above Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, who just look like unstoppable forces on great offenses. Got to have 39 yards. Only has 6 catches. I agree he's on RB1, and I agree he's going to get better as he gets back into this offense. The way Derrick Henry and Saquon are playing, I don't see putting anybody up there. Maybe that'll prove wrong.
I hope you're right, because I
The
have
schedule or
Henry in a
not.
couple leagues.
Yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry's just a
Oh, but
touchdown
schedule does
receiver.
matter. I mean, up until that Chase Brown fumble, we watched him this past week. He had, 30 yards on 11 carries or something? Like, he
Which would be
didn't
about what
get
McCaffrey
anything
had
going.
for the whole game. But then the rest of that game,
Except McCaffrey catches 6 balls every game, and Henry doesn't catch any balls.
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm more on the side of
I'm,
Christian McCaffrey being the RB1. I mean, I think that's what they've all been waiting for, and the Bucs did a really good job in that game. I mean, I know 6 for 68 sounds like a lot, but there was really only one. He kind of slipped out on one side where we didn't have coverage, and then he had like a 30-yard gain. So the rest of that is 13 for 39 and like 5 for like 30. I mean, it was, we did a really good job stopping him, and then he still racked up like 16 points. So, I mean, I see, regardless of game plan, because the problem with Derrick Henry is, yes, they came back and resurged, and then he got that touchdown because Lamar kind of fell on the one. But besides that, it was not a good game, and Derrick Henry can get scripted out. There's no scripting out for Christian McCaffrey, regardless of if they're ahead or behind. He's gonna get the ball. So I'm with Kendall on this. I mean, but obviously, if you're Henry or Saquon, like you're happy either way. These guys are all in contention for RB1.
Yeah. All right, Drew, this next topic, I know you are probably really excited, and I think we might be on different sides of this coin. Isaiah Pacheco, the Chiefs announced that they are opening the 21-day practice window for him to come off injured reserve. They then announced, Andy Reid said this morning, that he is unlikely to play this week, which makes sense. They're just opening the window. He's just going to come back to practice. But he more than likely will be back next week, I would assume. That's at least what the tea leaves seem to indicate. How excited are you for his return, and what are your expectations for Pacheco rest of season?
to be honest, I'm not as excited as I think you assume. I am also a Kareem Hunt owner. And if anything, I think it's going to kind of hurt both of them. Kareem's not going to be doing as much, but I don't think he's going to go away. I think it's really going to come down to this game to who's scoring the touchdowns, and I don't know on a week-to-week basis if you're going to be able to know who that is. So if you have Kareem Hunt, it really kind of muddies this Chiefs backfield. Now, if you don't have Kareem Hunt, it's obviously better to have like Isaiah Pacheco than nothing. And I do think he's going to be startable the rest of the way, but you got to wait and see how this backfield shakes out. I mean, the Chiefs are rolling without it. How much are they really going to throw him in and just lean on it for 20 carries a game?
There's a little bit of hope for Pacheco because Kareem Hunt has been so good, but he also isn't getting chunk yardage. So if Isaiah Pacheco comes in and looks a little more explosive, then, I mean, there's hope for a split backfield. And we've seen, he's not going to be what you drafted him as because Hunt's been so good, but we've seen guys be productive in a split backfield type of fashion. So, I mean, there's a little hope, but obviously it's definitely dampened. I don't think you can argue that whatsoever because, as you said, Kendall, Kareem is not going to go away. They're not going to just rip all those snaps from him.
Yeah, I mean, he's played too consistently well. He's also a decent blocker, and he has a nose for the goal line. That might be the bigger concern. I do think, and you touched on it really briefly, Rob, like the upside, the big play upside hasn't really been there for Kareem. He's only averaging just over 3.5 yards per carry. So even though he doesn't get
more than 8 yards. He doesn't get more than 8 yards on any rush. So I mean,
yes, but he
just seems
anything.
to always get that. Yeah.
So I agree that there is some room for Pacheco to take a lion's share, but we've seen Kareem work in a complementary role on this Chiefs offense in the past with other guys that were supposed to be the RB1, a la Jamal Charles. And so knowing that we've seen this in the past and they trust him as someone that drafted Pacheco, was lucky enough to also scoop up Hunt weeks ago, I'm concerned that, when Pacheco comes back, he's not just going to give me that same production, and I'm also not going to be able to start Kareem Hunt, and both are going to be watered down to what I would probably call an RB2 and a flex play at best, I think.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on the rankings there. I'm right on that take, actually.
Yeah.
All right. So, speaking of running backs, I know one of you guys, there's someone in Cincinnati, despite his awful fumble that we referenced earlier, has this guy really high, Chase Brown, as a potential league winner, which it's wild to think because entering the season, Rob, you were all on the Chase Brown train. And then 3 weeks into the season, he was playing like 12% of the snaps. And we're like, oh my God, clearly this is Zach Moss's job. And like, I was wrong. And now here we are a little over a month later, and this guy might be a league winner at running back.
Yeah, I'm gonna give myself a little pat on the back for my drafting this year because even though I made aggressive moves and got some of these guys off my team, my second half of the year, like come-ons between Ridley, Cameron Sutton, and Chase Brown have really popped off. But Chase Brown, I mean, I was the one that put him in there. I think he's a league winner because of where you end up getting him, whether he's on the waiver wire, he was like a lower end draft pick, things like that. I mean, he took over this backfield in Cincinnati with their defense because of his pass catching duties. Cincinnati with his defense, he's not going to be scripted out, and he's looked so good running and catching the ball. So he's a little bit of, I think he's going to be an RB1 rest of the season, a top 10 guy. I see him in the top 8 to top 12 realm for the rest of the season. And he's going to have some weeks where he puts up 25 points because he'll get the touchdowns and the catches. So I'm really, really high on him rest of the season. And a guy in the same vein that's a little bit not league winner, but I think you need to be really excited about based on what we've seen and based on rest of the schedule is your guy, Kendall, Bucky Irving. Now, he's my guy too, but he's your guy because I know you own him, Bucky Irving, because he's
And I was really high on him, saying he's clearly the better running back in Tampa Bay, and they finally are realizing that.
Yeah, and, to the credit of our conversation, though, Rachaad White hasn't gone away, and he's going to maintain his RB2 status.
Which we both said he wouldn't go away, yep.
Totally. Anyway, though, but Bucky, I'm with you on that because he's steadily gotten more of the carries. And rest of season, this schedule really opens up for the Bucs, so the game script is going to be 100% on getting some leads and running the ball more and finding more success. So if you're a Bucky owner, he's your RB3 probably. If you really are desperate and he ends up being your RB2, he's going to be another one in a lesser degree like Chase Brown to really come on the rest of the season.
Well, and I think to your point, like, even though if he's on your roster, he's probably your third, maybe your fourth running back on your roster from where you probably got him. But if you look at his production, he's producing mid to high RB2 numbers week in and week out. His last 6 weeks, 15, 17, 16, 15, 6, 17. 5, 15 plus with one dud. Like, that's consistent production. Even though Rachaad White, they do script a lot of plays near the goal line, especially on dump offs and in passes. Liam Cohen did a masterful job this past week getting him on that little diamond route over the middle to get, and White does have a nose for the goal line, but Bucky can also catch passes, is very, very efficient as a runner. And like you said, with the schedule coming up, like, I think he's an RB2 rest of season going forward, and everyone should feel happy to be starting him in that spot, I think.
Yeah, he's going to pop off. What about you, Drew?
All right,
you got any RBs you want to talk about?
There's a couple of running backs that I think are going to disappoint that Drew wants to detail, right?
Yeah, the first one would be Breece Hall. I mean, I think he's RB 7 or 8 this season so far, so he's not been unusable. But again, his floor just is not what it used to be. The down games are getting worse. I don't know how much you can trust this team, too, to keep competing as the year goes on. At what point do the Jets kind of throw in the towel? What point are these players starting to not give it their all quite so much, looking at a horrible, horrible season? And so, yeah, he is going to catch 4 or 5 passes. You're still probably starting him if you've got Breece Hall, unless you've got a really solid bench. But I wouldn't look for him to be that top 12 running back for the rest of the year.
Well, I also would be a little concerned with Breece Hall, too, because the promise he showed early on in his career, I mean, it's still early, but like earlier on in his career was this huge big play explosive ability. And while he's had a couple plays like that, he's starting to look like he's just taking what's there instead of what's over expected. So it's a little concerning, especially if you start to talk about dynasty talk and stuff like that. I mean, it doesn't look much different between Braylon Allen and him, and that's not what was supposed to be his card. He got drafted as like this massively explosive dual threat back. So I would definitely be concerned as a Breece Hall owner, and I think he will be a disappointment rest of the season.
Well, and Aaron Rodgers has never been the kind of guy to throw many dump offs to his backs in general. And outside of this past week when they didn't move the football at all against Arizona, even the 3-4 weeks prior after they got Devontae Adams, all of their scores are coming from outside the red zone. It's either 30 yards to Devontae or 30 yards to Garrett Wilson. And so that's limiting the opportunities for Breece Hall in the red zone as well. So I'm with you guys. Like, he's not an RB1 rest of season, which it's hard to say any of us really envisioned that, prior to the season coming in.
Absolutely. I mean, I think he was taken as a top 3 running back in most leagues, and you're happy to get him.
Yep.
So to be looking at an RB2 here with 7 games left is scary if you're a Breece owner for sure.
Well, Drew, what about your boy
a
JT
guy that
in
we didn't.
Indianapolis?
Real quick though, we didn't. One guy that I think we missed talking about is Bijan. We were talking about Christian McCaffrey and Saquon and Derek for RB1. The other guy that we should talk about in that conversation is Bijan Robinson. So I just want to throw that out there because he has a chance to be the RB1 as well. He's really come on strong, and they've really been utilizing
to bring us
him.
back.
Sorry.
That's all right. But no, Drew, I there's some other really disappointing backs, and as our resident Colts fan, I mean, I know Dolphins are your team, but the Colts were, you've always had affinity and ties to Indianapolis. I'm curious, like, we've watched JT even since he came back. He hasn't looked like the same player. Maybe it probably has a lot to do with Joe Flacco. Now that they're reinserting Anthony Richardson into their starting lineup, do you see him getting back to blossoming and becoming the RB1 he was drafted as, or are we looking at more like an RB2 rest of the season?
I'm going to disagree with you there. I mean, what was his slipping this week with Flacco? He had 21 carries for 115 yards and 2 catches. I mean, problem is the Colts aren't scoring, which is going to limit his upside. But his games with A-Rich, he's looked pretty good. I mean, even in games they lose, he's going to rush for 100 yards and get 2 or 3 catches. If he adds a touchdown to that, yeah, I think Jonathan Taylor's still an RB1. Again, maybe not the RB1. I wouldn't put him in that category or conversation, but I would definitely have him as an RB1. The rest of the Colts players, though, I'm definitely fading. With Anthony Richardson at quarterback, Josh Downs is not going to get forced at 8 targets every game anymore. Michael Pittman Jr. is having an extremely disappointing season. That whole team looks like they're in disarray. So, yeah, I think Jonathan Taylor is the only startable option.
Well, and you guys talked about Josh Downs a couple of times. Actually, the guy, I mean, I'm with you guys on fading the Colts players. And Drew, you called him JT an RB1. I mean, low end, I'm thinking more RB2 just based on like the scoring potential for JT moving forward. High end RB2, but RB2. But the guy I'm actually most disappointed in as far as like fading on the Colts is Adonai Mitchell. I felt like the coaches were praising him and saying he's going to get more snaps. It didn't come right away because that talk was like 3 weeks ago. But this last week, he really showed out. And I picked him up on waivers when I thought Joe Flacco was still going to be the guy because I thought that was his audition and he performed admirably in those circumstances. And I was excited for him, as rookie wide receivers do, to come on in the second half of the season. And he just looks different. Now, Downs is a good slot receiver and short area guy. But A.D. Mitchell looks like a legit potential alpha, at least from a physical standpoint. So I was excited to see him start to really find his groove as he gets reps. Because Reggie Wayne, I mean, we all know what he's done in the league. Reggie Wayne is really high on that guy. So A-Rich, I'd love to. I wanted to give him a chance to like perform and get into it. But I'm a little disappointed that A.D. Mitchell, I don't think is going to have quite the opportunity as A-Rich kind of figures it out.
Well, there's probably another offense that we might want to talk about if we're talking about fading almost entire offenses. And we referenced them earlier. That's the Chicago Bears. It's been a dumpster fire. I'm glad that even though I drafted DJ Moore relatively high, I haven't started him in 6 weeks. So I avoided those duds that most people were still enduring, contrary to the advice that we were giving on this show. But it's not just him who's underperformed. I mean, Keenan Allen's been non-existent. Rome Odunze's had a couple games that were start-worthy, but for the most, you're not going to know when those games are. So I think you can fade until something changes. Maybe the firing of the OC, suddenly the offense wakes up. But even their running game, DeAndre Swift looked like a world beater 4 or 5 weeks ago. He's struggling to find some running room these days as well. So I think at this point, that's an entire offense. Now, if you have Swift, you're probably starting him maybe in a flex spot, or if you're in a pinch, he's your RB2, unfortunately. But outside of that, I think you can pretty much fade everyone else in this offense until we see some kind of improvement in Chicago.
And I'd fade Swift too, not only because of game script, which I think is going to be an issue for Swift, but also they play Minnesota twice and Detroit twice. And these are both teams that really you're not running very well against whatsoever. I mean, he had the 4 weeks in a row where he had over 20 points, and then the last 2 weeks it's been 14 and 7.5. And we talked about their schedule in real life overall being really, really tough. They're gonna have to pass the ball. So I'm fading all Bears receivers, and DeAndre Swift I'm not very happy about. I mean, you talked about him as a flex. That's fine, a flex, because you're hoping for that situation when he scores a touchdown or something like that. But I'm really fading all these guys.
Yeah, I don't want anybody on the Bears on my team. I mean, I think a good rule for fantasy second half of the season is if the team is a dumpster fire that's self-destructing, just get out. And that's kind of how I feel on every Bears player. And I own them in different leagues, different receivers especially. I'm regretting that decision. I don't want anybody on this Bears team on my list. It's a dart throw. One of them might catch a touchdown each week, and that's kind of your high end that you're looking at.
All right, guys, before we move on to some Week 11 games and to debate which side is the right side to land on, I wanted to touch on a couple of quick injury news and notes coming out of Week 10. The Commanders running back, Brian Robinson Jr., who's been dealing with a hamstring injury the last couple of weeks. He sat out, even though he has practiced all week, each week, and yet he has not played. He is practicing again this week, but they're playing on a short week against Philadelphia on Thursday night. He's currently listed as questionable. He practiced in a limited capacity on both Tuesday and Wednesday. It remains to be seen if he's going to play. If he doesn't, you're at least getting that target, volume from Austin Eckler, who seems to score a touchdown at least one every time Robinson has been out. So just be aware and keep an eye on that. Trevor Lawrence, we touched on him earlier. He got ruled out this morning. They're playing Detroit. That means you should be benching every Jaguars player. There is not a Jag that you should be starting this week against Detroit. Nico Collins, even though they thought he might return last week, he didn't, but it does appear as though he's healthy enough from the hamstring injury. He should be out there Monday Night Football against the Dallas Cowboys, and look for him to have a pretty big game in that game. George Kittle popped up on the injury report this week with a hamstring injury. He's questionable against Seattle, so you want to keep an eye there. And then the Buffalo Bills, pretty much everyone on their offense. Keon Coleman already ruled out. Amari Cooper is banged up. He's questionable to play. Dalton Kincaid suffered a knee injury, left the game early. He hasn't practiced yet, and now they got to play the Chiefs. And somehow they're favored in Vegas, and we know how Mahomes does as an underdog. So jump on the Chiefs right now before you can, because that line is going to change drastically. We'll talk more about that when we get to some of the games, but it's a bad week for the Bills to be down all of their playmakers outside of Josh Allen and their running back. So that's really tough. And last one, another one that is worth keeping an eye on because it's Thursday night. Devonta Smith hurt his hamstring, and he's questionable to go on Thursday night. And if he can't go, then look for A.J. Brown to get a bump up, getting even more target share for Philadelphia against what's a subpar secondary in Washington. All right, guys.
And Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, Goddard's also questionable with an injury as well. So it could be really interesting to see how that game plays out on Thursday. Speaking of that game, so as we look forward to Week 11, there's 5 marquee matchups that I feel like that this week were worth delving into. The Washington Commanders on Thursday, coming off what was a really difficult loss, 1-point loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now they hit the road They don't have to drive very far. They're going to Philadelphia. The Eagles are favored by 3.5. Drew, where are you going with this one? What's the right side?
This is a tough one, but I'm going to take the Commanders here. I'm going to take the Commanders to win outright. They've been playing really well. I thought they kind of coughed it up at the end of the week last week, but they've been looking forward to this divisional matchup all season. I think the Eagles have been playing out over their skis a little bit. They've been looking great, but they've also four of their last 5 games, they've won all 5. 4 of those were against the Browns, the Giants, the Jaguars, and the Cowboys. So they have not exactly been beating the world here. We'll see. We'll see. I do think it's going to be a close game, but I like the Commanders to come out with the upset.
Yeah, I have the Eagles winning the game, but I have the Commanders covering the 3.5. So the Eagles, I know you talked about their competition. They put up 28 points 3 or 4 weeks in a row, though. So their offense is humming, and I think that Goddard, while injured, is going to play. I'm a little bit more concerned about Devontae Smith, but I actually am going to pay a lot of attention to this game for a couple reasons. I want to see, because Jaden Daniels has kind of come down to earth a little bit the last couple weeks, and there's a stat that came out about Cliff Kingsbury in second half of seasons, his offense really, really stalling. And so, I don't know if, the rookie wall is a real thing, and now that there's a lot of tape on Jaden, I'm not saying he can't do it, but I'm going to be watching this game, especially because the Eagles secondary, which was the bane of their existence last year, has really stepped up. Now, they took those high draft picks on Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, and those guys have really come on. And next year, I'm excited for their secondary as well, but they have become a tough team for quarterbacks. I think they're top 5 in terms of QB points under expected. So I'm going to pay attention to this game. I think the Eagles win. I think it's a very close one, though. I think it's under a field goal. But I want to see how the Commanders' offense looks.
Well, we can make it a trifecta. I think the right side, if you're putting money on this game, is Washington. That hook, putting it at 3.5, makes a big difference. We've seen Washington play in a bunch of close games. And, yeah, like you said, Drew, like Philly has beaten some of the worst teams in the league over the last month plus or so. And some of the time they looked impressive doing it, like last week against Dallas. Other times they just skated by. And we've watched this Philly offense, when they have Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown fully healthy, their offense looks very, very different. And when they don't, which all signs indicate that Devonta might not play on Thursday, if he doesn't, this offense is not nearly the same. And you're giving Marshawn Lattimore one more week. Remember, last week, he had just signed on Wednesday, or just got traded on Wednesday. So he's just learning the playbook defensively over in Washington. Now he's got another week under his belt, and they can say to him, hey, we're going to make your job really simple. You just go where A.J. Brown goes. And we've seen him for 10 years lock up a big, strong, physical receiver like Mike Evans, right? Just, hey, go cover that guy. So if I'm Washington, I'm like, hey, I'll make your job easy. You don't have to worry about, just follow that guy. And if he can eliminate some of those big downfield throws, Goddard's banged up. We don't know if he's going to go. Devontae might not go. I wonder where all that offense is going to come from. My gut says maybe Philly ends up winning the game potentially outright, but knowing that number sitting at 3.5, I love the hook. Give me Washington and the points as well.
Lattimore hasn't practiced, so I just want to say Lattimore hasn't practiced, so I don't think he's going to be in.
Well, he still hasn't practiced.
Yeah, no, he hasn't. He's still a DNP with the hamstring.
Okay, wow. I assumed he was coming back this week. All right. Well, that could certainly make things a little bit easier for Philadelphia's offense, especially like if Devonta does actually play.
No, Schefter reported 2 hours ago that Lattimore is out.
Oh, okay. So he's officially out. All right. So then half of that argument you can throw out the window defensively for Washington. In their secondary, which was really porous for the first 5 or 6 weeks, looked much better the last month, but I feel like a lot of that had more to do with who their opponents were. We saw them get torched again by Russ last week, so I might have to rethink this one, knowing they might not be able to slow down Philadelphia's air attack. But for now, I'll roll with Washington in the 3.5, because that was my initial inclination. Excuse me. All right, let's move on to Sunday. AFC North, divisional matchup. Every time these teams get together, it's always a slobber knocker. It's hard fought. It's a physical football game. Baltimore Ravens coming off that crazy shootout win against Cincinnati. They got the extra 3 days rest. They travel on the road to Pittsburgh. The Ravens are favored by 3. Rob, where are you going?
I got the Steelers here with an upset. Both taking the points and the real life game.
All right. How about you, Drew?
I'm going with Rob here. I'm taking the Ravens. I'm taking the Ravens to beat the Steelers on the road. I'm going against Rob. I do think the Steelers team is good. I think the Ravens team right now is playing like the best in the league. I think this game will be close, but I'm going to take the Ravens to cover, actually.
I'm with Rob. I'm going to take the Steelers to win this game outright. Drew, you said, this team might be playing the best in the league on one side of the ball. The other side of the ball, they're a dumpster fire. I mean, I feel like I might be able to throw a couple complete passes against this secondary, and then Kyle Hamilton just got ruled out. So he was the only halfway competent member in that secondary, and he's out now as well. And we've watched Russ start to cook the last couple of weeks. It's in Pittsburgh. With the way that defense is playing, I trust Pittsburgh at home in this spot. So give me the points. Give me the Steelers. All right. Next huge game. Every year, there's always a lot of talk about this game. I know the Bills, they circle it on their calendar every year, and they tend to win it in the regular season. They just can't win it in the postseason. Kansas City going on the road to Buffalo. This is the rare instance where Patrick Mahomes has to actually play in Buffalo. He's only played in Buffalo one time in his career, and that was the playoffs last year. Every other meeting they have had has always been in Arrowhead, playoffs and regular season. So now he goes back to Buffalo.
What a surprise, NFL schedulers. What a surprise.
So now he goes back to Buffalo. The Bills, as of right now, are favored by 2 points, which is an intriguing line. I feel like it's a little bit disrespectful to the Kansas City Chiefs, and they tend to, use some of that disrespect. So I'll just lay it out there right now. Between the injuries the Bills have, the track record of Kansas City playing well and Mahomes beating Josh Allen, and the fact that Kansas City has just magic, luck, some mojo, whatever you want to call it, and they're playing for a bigger cause, and the Bills have already won their division, I think that they clinched the 1 seed all, essentially. I got Kansas City. Give me the 2 points. I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. You're giving me points and Patrick Mahomes. I'll take that all day. Now, my gut here would love to take the Bills. I do think the Bills could pull this off, but missing pretty much everyone who can catch a pass on that offense, and you're getting points. Yeah, I'm taking the Chiefs here in the upset.
It's a shame because this line tells me Vegas thinks like the dam is bursting a little bit with Kansas City. Like they're getting closer and closer to these upsets, and it feels like that's got to be what they're betting on, is like that they can't keep getting away with this basically. And it's a shame because the Bills at full strength, I actually think, could definitely pull this off. The underrated thing besides the offensive players that are out is that, unfortunately, Matt Milano, while he got activated, he's one of the top cover linebackers in the league, and he's not going to play. He's out. So I would have loved to see Matt Milano lock down Travis Kelce, or at least that matchup, and see how the Bills could have done. Because at full strength, I do think the Bills, with the way this Chiefs team has been playing, could have challenged them. But I don't know how you, given the injuries, especially because then the Bills will have to rely on a run game, and where the Chiefs defense best at is stopping the run. So, this is just bad all around. So you got to take the Chiefs out right here.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Kelce and Milano's injury. With Milano not there, the Bills might struggle to lock him down. And Travis Kelce, everyone thought maybe he's over the hill. He had a really slow start to the season. He leads the NFL in catches the last 3 weeks. So I think Travis Kelce is just fine, and he's still paying attention to football, and he's not just going on dates with Taylor Swift. So yeah, for a multitude of reasons, it's hard not to like the Chiefs in this spot. And like you said, Drew, it's unfortunate because this could have been such a great matchup. On a side note, related in fantasy, Khalil Shakir. He's probably a really strong PPR play this week because who the fuck else is catching passes for Buffalo this week?
Mac Hollins, baby. Mac Hollins. He's been a guy they like. So I was joking a little bit. He's more of a deep shot play. But I actually firmly believe if you are looking for a flex guy, I mean he's definitely a guy that they'll look to for sure. They trust him.
All right. Another game that not a lot of people would have circled on the schedule, and if you just look at the schedules, you wouldn't think is very big. But in the AFC playoff picture, so we know there are basically 6 spots already on lockdown. There's the 4 division winners, and then there's the whoever doesn't win in the North between Pittsburgh and Baltimore is more than likely probably going to get a playoff spot. And the Chargers. I think at this point, with their schedule and the way they're playing, I trust them to get there. That leaves 1 spot between Denver, Cincinnati, the Dolphins, and maybe you could throw a couple other teams, which is crazy to think that 3 and 6 teams are alive, but they are, given that there is no clear favor for that 7th spot. And that makes this week's game for the Cincinnati Bengals on the road in Los Angeles against the Chargers really, really important. Cincinnati, they're on the road. They're getting, They're getting a 1.5. So Vegas has this borderline of pick 'em. We've watched the Bengals offense go up and down the field on just about everybody. Burrow's playing out of his mind right now. Defensively, they're a mess. So this is a really tough one. Rob, where are you leaning?
I don't want to pick against Harbaugh. I don't, and it's a better pick to pick Harbaugh. But I'm going to go ahead and pick the Bengals for the same reason that I think they had a chance to win last week, and it's just because they're the more desperate team. This is a make it break it. I mean, it was almost make it break it last week, but this is absolutely a make it break it here. I think they do just enough to beat the Chargers. The Chargers are going to be a tough out for everybody, but I think the Bengals have the chance to just have enough firepower to outscore this Chargers team. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the Bengals outright here for another upset.
I'm going to go with Rob on this. I'm going to take the Bengals. As much as I love Jim Harbaugh as a person, I haven't liked this Chargers team all year. Let's look at the teams this Chargers team has beaten. Titans, Browns, Saints, Broncos, Panthers, Raiders. Those are all of the wins they've got. Not a great team among them there. I mean, is there a good
Could you
team
call
among
Cincinnati
them there?
a great team? Are you calling Cincinnati a great team?
I think Cincinnati is better than they've looked. I think Cincinnati's better than any of those teams that the Chargers have beaten. And I think if Cincinnati wins this week, it brings the Chargers back into play. If San Diego wins, or if Los Angeles wins this week, like you said, then you can lock the Chargers into the playoff spot. I don't think they're going to drop that far the rest of the season. But if Cincinnati does win this week, it really becomes kind of a free-for-all in the AFC for those last 2 wild card spots. It's going to be fun to watch.
Well, it's funny, even though my gut says this Chargers team, for years, they found ways to lose games. They invented ways to lose games, as I'm sure a lot of Chargers fans know and remember some of those amazing playoff losses to the Jets and the Patriots. Like, it's been comical over the years. And so much of that goes against what John Harbaugh brings to the table. They're never buttoned up situationally. They make stupid mistakes, and Harbaugh has fixed all that. And despite that, I'm actually with you guys. I like the Bengals in this spot. The Chargers, they're not built, or at least they're not playing the way you would have expected them to play. You know, the first 6 weeks of the season, they were a run first, run second, throw third team. That's the kind of team they need to be to win this game. But their offense has transitioned, and they're throwing the ball considerably more. J.K. Dobbins has been far less effective running the football, and I think there's going to be a lot more points than you would normally want to have when you're going up against a Joe Burrow-led offense when they're humming the way they are. And you got to think T. Higgins is going to come back one of these weeks, right? Like, they keep expecting him to be back every week, and he hasn't been back yet. And, like, when he's there with Jamar Chase, I mean, we saw what Chase did by himself. Granted, that was against the dumpster fire Ravens secondary. But the Bengals also have that benefit, the extra 3 days off. So for that reason, I'm actually with you guys. I'm going to take the Bengals. I'm going to take the points. So it's funny, as we go into this final game, in 3 of the 4 games, we all have the dogs. And in one of the games, 2 of us did. So let's see what everyone thinks of this last marquee matchup. And it's another one that not many predicted would be a marquee matchup at this point in the season, but it's turned into one. An intra-conference matchup, the Atlanta Falcons going on the road to face the Denver Broncos. Falcons hold a 2-game divisional lead in the NFC South. they're mostly in control, especially via the tie break. But they've been so inconsistent all year. Denver Broncos sitting at 5-5. They're currently the final wild card spot in the AFC. So this is a really, really tight matchup. Denver's favored by 2.5. Drew, what's the smart play here?
I'm gonna take the Broncos to win, but I think it's gonna be close. I'll take the Falcons with the points. It's tough. The Falcons have been kind of Jekyll and Hyde this year. One week they look really good, especially if they play the Bucks. The next week they're losing to a Saints team that just fired its coach and has no quarterback. So it's tough to get a read on the Falcons. The Broncos, I feel like, are in a lot of close games, so I can definitely see this going anyway, but I'm going to take the Falcons to come.
I mean, I'm with you, Drew, on the Broncos, but I think they cover. I'm laying the points for the Broncos here. I think they win by 3 or more. So, I think it's a little bit of a slide for the Falcons. The Broncos, we all know what they can do on the secondary. Surtain's going to lock down Drake London. Darnell Mooney has a chance to pop off again. I think he's wide receiver 8 on the year so far. But I'm going to go ahead and take the Broncos here. I really love what Bo Nix has done, and I'm not impressed with Atlanta's defense. So I don't think that after playing a tough Chiefs defense and barely missing out on a win, I think the Broncos are going to come out angry and pissed and beat them.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good litmus test just in terms of mental fortitude for this young Denver Broncos team to lose the way they did last week, knowing, they're right there in a playoff position. They win that game, you can make an argument they're still alive for the division, even though realistically they still would have been 3 back. It would have been tough. So will they bounce back? I mean, I feel like they're almost getting what they needed this week, a home matchup against a soft defense. This Atlanta defense is soft as tissue paper. We all knew that you'd be able to move the ball against them on the ground this year, but A.J. Terrell was supposedly, one of the better cover corners in the league, and he's been atrocious. His PFF grades, dude can't cover anybody. He can't cover a blanket. It's been a mess. Teams have been exposing that secondary as well, and Atlanta's offense is predicated on being able to stay ahead of the chains and run the football effectively, and Denver's defense takes that away, at least to some degree. So I'm with you, Rob. I'm going to take Denver. I'm going to lay the 2.5 here. I think in that stadium, which is notoriously a really difficult place to play, I'm going to lay the points. I'm going to take the Denver Broncos. All right, so let's go through the rest of these games here. Just make some quick picks. There's a number of other games that are worth talking about. We won't go too deep into them, but we'll make picks on straight-out winners. Green Bay going on the road to face the Chicago Bears and that dumpster fire of an offense. Do they get the spark? Does the offense come to life? Drew, do you think the Bears pull off the upset?
No, Packers all the way.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. Packers, and they're going to get 6x.
Yeah, I mean, Green Bay has owned Chicago for years, so it's hard to like them in this game. I feel like Jacksonville had very, very little shot of winning in Detroit already. Now they're rolling with Mac Jones again. And Brian Thomas Jr. is nicked up. So going against Detroit, I'm guessing it's a clean sweep, right? We all got Detroit winning that game by.
Yeah, I might even take Detroit with the 13.5.
If there's a game where it's smart.
The line is 13.5?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
What?
And it's going to grow. The money coming in has already been going on Detroit. So that
what's
line,
the highest line of
Sunday
all?
Will be 14.
Is that not in the highest line of the season?
No, I've seen lines 16, 18 before. It's not often,
Wow.
but I've seen higher lines.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
but nevertheless,
Detroit
this is that absolutely. So next game is actually intriguing. Minnesota's back on the road again. They nearly coughed it up and played like trash against Jacksonville. They won 12-7 and kicked 4 field goals. Now they head to Tennessee against a better defense. They're favored by 5.5, the same number they were favored by last week. Do you think Minnesota gets another victory, or do they actually, show some kinks in the arm and drop one, Rob?
This is tough because I do like Tennessee's defense, and Sam Darnold has, I don't want to say turned back into a pumpkin, but I watched that game, and he threw some pretty ugly interceptions, all in the red zone and just making poor decisions. So This one's tough for me. I can't. I'm not ready to trust Tennessee yet on the offensive side of the ball. So I still got Minnesota. I think they're with Aaron Jones and Justin Jefferson and Hawkinson. Hawkinson's going to be a big part of this game plan. I just see Minnesota pulling this out again. I'm Sam Darnold's giving me a little pause for concern or cause for concern, but I still got Minnesota coming out on top.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like one of us sat here a few weeks ago and said Sam Darnold is not going to continue throwing 4 touchdowns and no interceptions every week. He's thrown 5 picks the last 2 weeks. He looks like Sam Darnold. That being said, for the 3rd week in a row, I'm going to take Minnesota to have a nice win against a horrible AFC South team. This will be the Titans. They've done it against the Jaguars and the Colts the last 2 weeks. Yeah, I don't think the Vikings are as good as they look to start the season off, but I don't think the Titans are good in any way, shape, or form. I think that Vikings defense is going to win this for them.
Yeah, they're tough to run on, and do we really trust Will Levis to win with his arm yet? I'm just.
Or at all.
Yep. It's a clean sweep. I'm with you guys. I think even though a lot of bettors are going to look at this like, hey, it's almost the same exact situation as last week on the road against an AFC South opponent. Same spread, but I'm with you. That defense alone might do enough to win this game like it did last week. All right, Las Vegas Raiders going on the road to face the Miami Dolphins, who are suddenly alive in the playoff race. Drew, I'm guessing you're taking the Dolphins?
Yeah, I'm going to take the Dolphins here, although the way they've been playing, their offense has still not gotten back to the heights it was last year. Yeah, they won this week against the Rams, which, like you said, keeps them in the playoff race, especially even though they're 3-6. The next 3 games look very winnable for them to get back to 500. I do think the Dolphins are going to win. That 7.5 line, though, I wouldn't be taking those, but I will take the Dolphins to win this game.
Yeah, I mean the Dolphins aren't playing to the expectations, and I'm gonna still take the Dolphins, but it'll be interesting to see what the Raiders' offense looks like because they got rid of their offensive coordinator, different play caller, and slightly different tendencies that we'll have to see how it works out. I could see the Raiders pulling off like a random upset here just because the Dolphins have kind of just not
They did
looked
announce
right.
today that Gardner Minshew is going to be starting again.
Yeah.
Which I think probably helps them. I like Minshew because we've at least seen Minshew have games where he's productive. Whereas Aiden O'Connell, I feel like it's $160, a touchdown, and 2 picks. You can just write it
what
in.
Aiden O'Connell is good for is fantasy as a Bowers owner because he hyper targets Bowers, but Gardner Minshew is going to be able to spread the ball around a little bit more, look for Jacoby Myers to do it. This has upset potential. It says like trap game potential because they didn't get rid of their head coach, but they got rid of their offensive coordinator. So I mean, it's a little bit of a.
So are you taking the Raiders?
No, it's like I'm going to take the Dolphins. I just don't trust. I don't trust the Dolphins right now, but I'm going to take them overall either
I
way.
will say, I think there's one unit that's been very overlooked so far. Part of it because our quarterback's out. The Dolphins' defense has been extremely solid all year, and that's why I might take them. I don't think the Raiders can score enough.
Yes, I agree. For that reason, I'm on the same boat. All right, next game, I could see someone taking an upset here. The Rams on the road in New England. I personally am not going to take one. As a Pats fan, I am annoyed that we won last week. I don't want to win. Let's stop beating bad teams. Let's lose the rest of our games, please, so we can get another really, really good draft pick. So I am going to pick the Rams, and hopefully the Rams will take care of business, and we can move closer to the number 1 pick.
Yeah, I'm going Rams as well there.
Yeah, the New England's just not good enough on either side of the ball. I love Drake May, and when you guys get him a real receiver, I can't wait to see him pop off. But the Rams' defense has actually kind of like the Dolphins been kind of riding under the radar, and they've been relatively solid the last like 6 weeks. So I'm gonna take the Rams here.
Okay, cool. Next game, Cleveland at New Orleans. It's basically a pick'em game in Vegas. Interestingly, the leading receiver in this game from either team is Alvin Kamara and his 421 yards receiving. So this could go either way. I'm going to take the Saints. Not that I think they're great. They're obviously far from it, but we were reminded really quickly before the bye, Jameis Winston is Jameis Winston. So knowing this is in New Orleans, I'm going to take the Saints. If it was in Cleveland, I probably would have taken Cleveland.
I'm going to take Cleveland. I'm going to take Jameis in the revenge game, getting back at the Saints here. I think the Saints last week got a boost from the new coach and some energy there, but that team hasn't looked great. The Browns have at least looked like they have some life with Jameis. I think coming off a bye week, I feel like like you said, Jameis will be Jameis, which means it could be a 4 TD game, or it could be a 4 interception game, or it could be both. But I'm gonna pick a close game. I'm gonna take the Browns.
Yeah, I mean, the Saints just had their QB firing resurgence game, and it was against one of the rivals, Atlanta, so it's always going to be a little bit tighter. I'm going to easily take Cleveland here. Jameis is Jameis, like you said, Kendall, but for the opposite reason. He just had his dud game, so now he's going to go in and throw for 300 yards. So, I mean, it's, in the Saints defense, I know they played Atlanta tight, but like I just said, it's a rival game, so, things are a little tighter. The Saints defense is still really bad. And I think that the Browns offense has enough firepower, and Nick Chubb has had a couple weeks to kind of get in on it too. And the Saints run defense is not any good. So I'm going to take Cleveland here, and I actually think that they're going to have some offensive output.
All right. How about Indianapolis traveling to the New York Jets? This game could probably go either way. Rob, who you like to win this one?
I mean, Drew's pick against the Jets thing has just gotten in my brain because it's so annoying because he has no rationale besides just hating the Jets, and it just has worked.
The rationale is they're the Jets and they usually lose.
It just worked. It's just hard because Anthony Richardson. I mean, I can't pick him right now. I just don't know what there is to see. And I'm just going to go ahead and pick the Jets. And I don't have a good reason, but I don't think there's a good reason to pick either team right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick the Jets. At some point, their defense has to step up. I don't know what is going on with their defense. I mean, we can talk about their offense, but their defense has also been such a disappointment this year. So I just think that, with A-Rich struggling to get back in, I don't think he finds his groove just yet. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the Jets.
And somebody's going to have to explain to me how the Jets are favored by 4 after losing 6 of their last 7 games. This team has looked awful.
Bad doing
their
it.
Defense just got carved up by the Cardinals last week. I mean, right 2 weeks after getting carved up by the Patriots. I'm all in on pick against the Jets. Let's go with some Anthony Richardson resurgence. Jonathan Taylor's better with him in. I think the Colts take it.
I will say if they lose. If they lose to this Colts team, I'm gonna just take the Drew method and just say blindly, not even look at who they're playing, and just
end the
say,
season.
Dude,
well, I'm going to
over
preemptively take Drew's approach. I am going to take the Colts to win this game. I think that dumpster fire is only going to get worse. People are only going to start laughing more and more at Aaron Rodgers. So I am taking the Colts to win that game. And the last game of the week that we haven't touched. Oh, no, wait, there are 2 games left. Seattle at San Francisco. I'm guessing it's hard to take Seattle in this spot. I'm taking the Niners. Are either of you guys going Seattle?
I'd take Seattle with the 6.5 points, but I'm taking the Niners.
Yeah, it's got to be the Niners. I mean, Seattle's weakness is their offensive line, and San Francisco on the defensive end strength is their defensive line. So I see this as being another one of those like the Giants game. I want to pick Seattle because I think coming off the bye week, I think their offense, DK Metcalf's going to be back, I think. So but it's got to be San Francisco.
And then on Monday night, the Houston Texans stay in state and play the Dallas Cowboys. Does Dallas have any shot to even show up at Jerry World?
No, Nico's coming back.
At least Nico's the game's at night. So they'll be looking into the sun.
What about the moon, Drew?
I haven't figured the moon in. You're right. I'm going to take the Texans.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's got to be the Texans, right?
I think we're probably all on the Texans on that one. All right, so that's going to take care of the rundown of all the games. I'm going to make a quick transition to Kendall's Corner. We are coming off another massive week. We are printing money at Kendall's Corner this year. Hit both our Moneyline Parlay and our Time to Tease again last week. We are up hitting at 67% this year. looking to continue to make money. Moneyline parlay of the week, we're back at it. Put the Lions against the Jags. That's a dub. Niners against Seattle. Seattle might be tough. Niners are winning that game. And Texas against Dallas. Bet those 3 teams on the money line, minus 110. That's same odds of you making a bet against the spread on any one game. What do you feel more confident in? A team against the spread, which Vegas is really good at setting lines, or the fact that those 3 teams are obviously going to win? I'm going to go with the latter. And in our time to tease, we're going to tease that Niners line down to a 0.5 point. So it's basically a pick 'em. Tease Houston down to 1.5. They're going to beat Dallas by more than a point. And Kansas City, they're getting 2. They shouldn't be getting points to begin with. You tell me you could tease that up to 8? That's a lock. Let's lock in both our money line parlay of the week and the time to tease. Let's keep on making money. Let's do it. For Drew James and Robb Hue, I'm Kendall Capps. We will see you here, guys, next week.